So now more than ever, I feel like I'm really just not grasping the JavaScript language. It's easy just to say that up front, just to clear the air. Many people out there, I feel like, are in the same boat. Recently, there has been updates for JavaScript to be like ES6 compatible, where it was ES5 or something like that, and then all of a sudden there's this whole new syntax to learn. Suddenly jQuery is the devil and you shouldn't use it or you'll get shunned or stoned or something like that. And to me it's all just like, so much at once, all these new frameworks, all these things that I'm wondering where we went wrong. Like what's happening to make this huge shift such a thing? And I think what it boils down to is that JavaScript, you can use it pretty much everywhere, which is the biggest perk about the language. But in that, there's so much garbage that comes with the language that people are struggling to find real answers out there for. So things on Stack Overflow might have like up to 20 answers for a similar problem, or the same problem, I should say. And you're left wondering as a developer, like, well, which one should I copy and paste? Because you've done that. We've all done that. I do it. But then anymore, if you say JavaScript, finding a vanilla JavaScript solution is practically impossible because everything used to be in jQuery. You used to have to use jQuery, and all those things are in my mind these days, and I'm just like, well, where should I even start? So I feel like I should start from the very ground up and really dive into the language itself. But I've tried this, I feel like, I can count on my hand how many times I've done it before, which isn't many, but it's like each time I learn the syntax, I learn the programmatic theories behind it, like all of the operators, the signs, and how functions work and all of that stuff. But how to actually build things with this language is what I'm after. And I don't want to just use a framework. I don't want to just settle for learning, say, React, and that's how I understand JavaScript. I want to know the language first and then go into React and understand where and why things happen the way they do, as opposed to the latter. So as you can sense, my struggle with it, it's kind of one of those things that's been eating at me for some time, and I'm wondering how I could approach it. And I feel like it should be something similar to what I've been doing. I've been doing a Let's Build series on my channel, on my blog, called Let's Build with Ruby on Rails. And it's funny how you dive into a framework such as Rails, which is massive in its own right. It's been around for years, and there's still much to learn for me, but I'm starting to grasp it, and it's making more and more sense to me how things, the asset pipeline works, how helpers are generated, how to create helpers, models, views, controllers, how everything connects and talks to each other. And those things are making more sense because I've kind of submersed myself in that architecture. So I feel like with JavaScript, I kind of need to do the same thing. And while Ruby on Rails is a framework, you just still need to know, more or less how to code with Ruby, and same with Rails, which is kind of Ruby within HTML. But anyway, I think with JavaScript, I'm kind of after the same token. So what I want to do is try to maybe adapt a new model, a new series that I'll start for my own benefit primarily. It may benefit you, hopefully it does. If not, that's cool too. Maybe you guys can point me in the direction of a better way to learn JavaScript without resorting to the jQuery method, or no, you should do the vanilla JS method because that's all the shit right now. And just because, like, stuff like that, I just want to kind of get away from all the opinionated sides of it and just get down to what the language is, how it works, how I can use it to extend my own apps currently, like even Rails apps, which is primarily what I work in day to day. How could I, kind of move away from the jQuery model and use Rails plus JavaScript to make something really reactive or dynamic, or interactive, which was the main reason behind JavaScript in a browser. So that's kind of where I'm feeling these days. This video is kind of more or less a supplemental thing to a blog post I wrote about JavaScript. I called it "I Suck at JavaScript" because I feel like I do. It really kind of gets me down as a front-end developer who should know something like that, When I think of HTML and CSS, I'm like, oh, no problem, I've got this. And SAS, all that stuff when it comes to tooling, making CSS and designs look exactly the same is easy for me. I understand that. I know how those things work. So when it comes to JavaScript and creating interactivity, I can do the basics. I feel like I know enough to be deadly, as most people describe it. But in long-term applications, I want to write code at scale. So I don't want to write code that it works, but I have no idea how it works or why it works the way it does. I kind of want to write it in such a reusable pattern that we could adopt it later. Things like namespacing and object-oriented programming is kind of what I'm after, or functional JavaScript. I'm understanding more of the functional CSS routes, so I think with JavaScript it's a similar model, but I'm kind of wanting to dive into that to make everything I write more or less reusable, so I don't have to always grab some DOM element and manipulate it with basic JavaScript all the time. So after I get the principles down, I feel like I could move on to a framework such as Vue.js or React. I've heard Vue kind of lends an easier hand to certain frameworks out there like Laravel, which is a PHP-based framework. The same is true for Rails. You can use it with a gem called Webpacker, or just actually out of the box with Rails 5 now, so that's kind of cool. So I want to get into where I can use those things and reach for those things, and know that with those I'm confident in what I'm building and how it should work, as opposed to having to reach back into jQuery land and find the quick and easy way to do something, which certainly works. I mean, jQuery was more or less a library that made sense at the time because so many browsers had terrible support for things, and jQuery just made them all possible, made it consistent across each. So now we're entering this time where ES6 is coming into fruition, and that language is kind of picking up where jQuery left off, I think, or at least I hope. That's what I understand. And you're able to do things more like importing other files into other files, or I don't know, declaring certain types of variables that aren't just variables. I don't know, all these crazy types of things that you can do now that I've seen in the wild. Couldn't tell you how they work, but it's neat to see them work. So like libraries like React or Vue, for instance, stuff just updates on the fly. Technologies such as like fetching data or posting data with the fetch API that I've been reading about is pretty cool. I don't really know how it works. It looks simple, but I'm sure there's more to it than just using it. So where I kind of divide the line is, okay, jQuery was a solution to a problem, and we used HTML and CSS, and everything was good and grand. It worked. It kind of created spaghetti code, still does, but you can kind of work around it. It's not a fail-safe solution, but it is a solution. And now we're entering this reality of, okay, you have to adopt a framework to do these things, because the framework creates a virtual DOM that requires all these dependencies to compile, to lint, to do all these other things to your code that makes it performant, efficient, and dynamic, which is awesome. But are we that far away from where we were is my question. Like with jQuery, you'd load up the library and you'd have all this available to you. And I'm just calling, it could be any library. It could be Lodash or something like that. But these libraries were just more or less helpers. They let us do things with ease. You could do it in a few keystrokes as opposed to typing an entire 300 line function just to send a AJAX call or something in regular JavaScript. So where I'm going with this is, like, I feel like we're just stirring up shit to find new ways to do things, and are we gaining anything by it? I'm not so sure, because like React, for instance, you aren't writing HTML anymore. I mean, you are, but it's in your JavaScript, which is kind of concerning. Same with your CSS. Like, those things live in new places now, and what happened along the way to make that okay, and the reality of things. So that's where I'm at with it, and I'm trying to figure out the best path to take. So I feel like starting fresh is one thing. I've linked to some books I'm going to try to read and go through, primarily from Kyle Simpson's You Don't Know JS, and then Eloquent JavaScript. I can't say his name, Marin Haverbeek. Sorry if that's you, I butchered it. And then Wes Boss is doing a bunch of stuff that's pretty cool about JavaScript, and I prefer his approach because he's building actual apps with some of this stuff. It's actual working realistic things, and that makes it click more with me. I think I'm more of a visual learner, so if I can kind of follow in his footsteps, maybe create my own takes on things he's doing, or just, you know, I don't know, small apps with JavaScript and then later grabbed into the frameworks, I feel like I could better understand the language and understand what to reach for when the time comes, as opposed to Googling it, looking on Stack Overflow for about an hour and deciding which answer is the best and copying and pasting it to match my own application. So I feel like that's where a lot of developers can relate these days, and it's one of those things where the JavaScript language is evolving, and it's not quite in a state to where it's going to stop evolving. So everyone's freaking out and creating a new framework, or, you know, loading their own take on things and saying you should write it this way instead of this way. So that's where I'm like, how should I do it? Because coming from a Ruby on Rails environment, that's what I work with most of the time now. There's so many conventions that you should follow that I actually prefer. It's super opinionated, and that to me is great because you know where to look for it when the error happens. It tells you where an error happens, and JavaScript doesn't do that. It's a loosely typed language, and it freaks me out. So I'm hoping after submersing myself in these books, actually writing JavaScript for real, there's a bunch of Reddit channels about JavaScript I might get into, and just more or less submersing myself has been known to work in the past. So I think that's my plan going forward. If you're in the same boat, or if you have any tips for me in the same regard, feel free to leave comments. I'd love to hear about it, how you maybe solve this problem of your own. Like, how did you finally learn? If you did, if you aren't, what steps are you taking to learn? I'd love to hear more about it. So with that said, I'm going to sign off. As always, thank you for watching. Definitely check out my other tutorials and videos on my channel if you're on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube, I have a channel, it's called Web Crunch. So definitely search that, and that's it. So peace.